Hi, my name is Karina Gunn, and I am a current Girl Scout ambassador, and I'm working on my Gold Award. For my Gold Award project, I wanted to do a seminar on food waste and composting in Santa Monica, but unfortunately, due to the circumstances, I've had to convert to an online seminar, or a webinar, if you will. So here is that webinar, and let's just get started. So this webinar is split into two main groups, food waste and composting. And the first one is food waste, so let's get started on that. The first thing we want to talk about is what are the causes of food waste. I believe there are three main causes. The first one is overproduction by farms, which is essentially just farms are creating too much food and there is not enough demand for all that food. The second one is overconsumption by consumers, which is when families or individuals overestimate the amount of food that they think they can eat and then end up throwing away a lot of it. And part of that is also the undereducation on the longevity of food. So a lot of us will see that the expiration date has passed and immediately throw it away, when in most cases food is still good to eat for a significant amount of time after the expiration date has passed. So that is what we're going to focus on in today's webinar. And the first thing we're going to do is watch this YouTube video about kind of the overarching theme of food waste.
I started coming across these numbers about how much was being wasted. And I just thought, how is nobody talking about this?
40% of everything raised or grown is not in fact eaten.
If that much food is being wasted, how much of it is still good, and can we eat it?
Oh, we're trying to survive off food waste right now.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
100%.
you're gonna hit the jackpot.
I'm starting to enjoy this.
Is that cold stuff? Can I buy those bananas?
Yeah, you want to buy the bananas? Sure.
Yeah. I'm not going to ask for a deal. I'd rather just not draw attention to it.
Supermarkets tell you what diameter, length, curvature, all of those parameters have to be exactly right.
Our whole fridge is full of stuff that needs to be eaten tomorrow.
This is not a lifestyle that I want to continue.
Well, neither do I, so let's stop.
I don't want to stop because we haven't proved anything yet.
Highs and lows of the project, you know? Highs and lows. This is a high point.
This is edible, but it's not edible to the supermarkets. As a grower, that's heartbreaking. When you grow the fruit and you can't sell it, that bothers me.
Yeah, this would be every week.
You wouldn't want to know how much product we would dispose of.
Wasting food is not only widespread, but it's condoned.
The scale of the stuff that we've seen so far is pretty shocking, and I think we've only seen like the littlest bit.
So that was just a trailer for the film called Just Eat It. If you guys want to watch the whole documentary, I'm pretty sure you can find it on YouTube in its entirety. But I thought there were just some cool facts, or rather sad facts, that I wanted to share with you guys, like the fact that 40% of the food produced in America goes to waste, and that buyers look for such specific measurements for their food that so much of it gets rejected, and that obviously contributes to a lot of the waste. So, now that we have talked about what causes food waste, let's start with a preliminary activity. There should be a 4-question survey called Preliminary Survey attached to whatever you're viewing this on. And this is just to kind of gauge how much you know. If you don't know, that's okay. Just make an educated guess. So go ahead and pause this video, take about 5 minutes to fill out the preliminary survey, and then come back and we will continue. Alright, so by now you filled out the preliminary activity, and we will get into the answers more in depth later, but if you were wondering, yogurt lasts 1 to 3 weeks past its expiration date, carrots 3 to 4 weeks past purchase date, blueberries 2 weeks past purchase date, and crackers 3 months past expiration date. So you might be wondering, what is the purpose of sell by dates and best by dates and expiration dates and stuff like that? And they can also be really confusing because there's so many dates that you can choose from to put on food. So let's dive in and see what those mean. So we have this video right here that kind of explains how dates are determined, so let's take a look.
All right, another headlines now. How often do you throw away food simply because it's past the date on the package? You may be making a mistake. CBS 2's Chris Van Cleve explains.
From milk to meats, salad to cereal, if it's in the grocery store, it's got a date on it. Some say use by, others are marked sell by, and some just have a date. But what do they mean?
Well, that's a good question. I don't want to eat something that's expired.
But Peter Lehner from the National Resources Defense Council says these dates are not expiration dates.
You don't need to throw it out if it's past the date on the label.
The NRDC estimates 9 out of 10 Americans are confused by the dates. A family of 4 throws out about $2,000 worth of still edible food every year.
The dates are up to the manufacturers. There's no federal standards for food safety labeling for anything in the store except infant formula.
Lehner says many foods, if stored properly, can last long after the labels say.
Alright, so that video kind of told us how dates are determined by grocery stores, but let's dive in to what those dates actually mean. So the sell-by date essentially tells the store how long to display the product for sale, and this is absolutely not an expiration date. Food is still perfectly fine after the sell-by date. The best by date indicates when a product will be of best flavor or quality, and this is also not an expiration date. It's more of a recommendation as to when food will be its best, and it's still definitely good to eat after this date. The use by date is the last date recommended for the use of product at peak quality. This is also not an expiration date. You can totally eat food after it has reached its alleged peak quality. And then the freeze by date, pretty self-explanatory. It just indicates when a product should be frozen by to maintain peak quality. And none of these dates are definite indications of when food is bad, so definitely take them with a grain of salt. We're going to get into later how to determine whether or not a food has actually gone bad, but for now, this is what the dates mean. Alright, so let's get into how you determine whether or not you should throw food items away. First, we need to understand how food spoils. Basically, food spoils because of microorganisms like mold, yeast, or bacteria that develop on or in a food item. And there are 2 types of bacteria that are found in food. There's pathogenic bacteria, which causes foodborne illness, and spoilage bacteria, which is, as it sounds, it causes foods to deteriorate and develop unpleasant characteristics like bad taste, odor, etc. And spoilage happens when spoilage bacteria have nutrients, moisture, time, and favorable temperatures. So we are going to dive into the ideal environment to ensure the longevity of food. And obviously that depends on the type of food. Basically, we're going to talk about how we can prevent the spoilage bacteria from getting on the food, and then how we can prevent, if it does get on the food, it actually manifesting and causing food to spoil. So here is an example of pathogenic bacteria, and here is an example of food spoilage bacteria. So obviously they look different, and like we said, they do different things. Alright, so let's get into how to properly store your food. Alright, so this section of the webinar is split into 5 different sections, 1 for each food group. So if you are filling out the seminar worksheet, which should be attached somewhere near where you found this video, this is where you're going to start filling it out. So let's get into how to properly store dairy. Milk tastes best when it's stored very cold, as you guys might know, and it can be refrigerated or actually frozen, but it should not be kept at room temperature. And contrary to popular practice, you should not leave your milk in the fridge door because it's actually the warmest place in the fridge. If you think about it, it's constantly being exposed to warm air outside of the fridge. So instead, store it in the back of the fridge where it's the coldest. Cheese, it actually depends on the type of cheese because cheeses have different moisture contents. So hard cheeses have a lower moisture content, so they should be stored in the vegetable crisper, and those are things like Parmesan and Swiss. And soft cheeses have a higher moisture content, so those should be stored in the fridge shelves on paper, and those are things like brie and blue cheese. Yogurt also should be stored on fridge shelves. immediately after purchasing, and eggs actually can be stored anywhere in the fridge. And fun fact, eggs from the farmer's market can be stored at room temperature because they most likely haven't had their bacteria-free coating washed off, so they are less likely to contract bacteria and go bad. Alright, so next we're going to talk about vegetables. Vegetables are also split into two different categories because some can be left not out of the fridge and some can be left in the fridge. So let's start with the ones that can be left on countertops. So basically you want to leave them in a cool, dry place, and most of the time that's either countertops or pantries. So these are things like tomatoes, potatoes, mushrooms, eggplant, garlic, onions, and avocados until you open them. Most of these you can leave in a cool, dry place until opened, and then you want to put them in the fridge to maintain their freshness and flavor. Next is ones that can be left in the fridge and ideally in the vegetable crisper to maintain a consistent temperature. So these are things like leafy greens, asparagus, Brussels sprouts, carrots, broccoli, cauliflower, cucumber, zucchini, bell peppers, radishes, and herbs. Alright, next we have fruit. Fruit is again split into two different categories because you store different things in different places. So ones that you would store in a cool, dry place like your pantry or your countertops is bananas, citrus, mangoes, plums and peaches, pears, pineapple, and melons. And then in the fridge would be apples, berries, kiwis, and rhubarb. Next we have meat, poultry, and fish. So meat and poultry should be sealed in containers and put on the bottom shelf of the fridge. And this is because when meat and poultry are being stored, sometimes they leak juices and you don't want those to potentially fall onto produce or whatever else you have sitting on the bottom of your fridge. So that's why you want to keep meat and poultry on the bottom, and actually fish as well I would recommend putting on the bottom shelf. And for meat and poultry, you definitely want to freeze before the use by date to maintain its freshness, and then fish in wax paper, plastic wrap, or aluminum foil in the fridge on the bottom shelf. Alright, next is wheat products. So this is things like bread, flour, and crackers. Bread can be stored in plastic at room temperature. So that's basically outside on a counter or in a pantry. And it can be frozen, but it cannot be refrigerated, or it's not recommended to be refrigerated. Flour should be stored in an airtight container in a cool, dry place away from sunlight, so in your pantry again, or in some cabinets. Crackers in an airtight container in a dark, cool pantry. Alright, so now let's get into when to actually throw your food away. So again, this part is split into 5 sections, and we are going to start with dairy. So for milk, it will last 2 to 3 days past printed date, and it should be thrown out when it starts to have a sour taste or smell, a slightly yellow color, or a lumpy texture. And then like we said before, cheese has different moisture contents, so the higher the moisture content, the shorter the lifespan. So soft cheeses will last 1 to 2 weeks past purchase date, hard cheeses 3 to 4 weeks, and shredded cheese only 1 week. Yogurt should last 1 to 3 weeks past printed date, and one way to know if you should throw it away is if an unusual amount of surface liquid accumulates. So pretty much all yogurts do have a small amount of surface liquid that accumulates as it stays in the fridge, but if there is a abnormally large amount of surface liquid, then it should probably be thrown away. Or when curdling occurs near the bottom or mold appears, which is kind of a rule of thumb for most dairy, if there's mold, then you should probably throw it away. Eggs should last 4 to 5 weeks past its sell-by date, and an egg should be thrown away if it smells fishy or not like it should upon cracking it open. And one way to actually figure out if an egg has gone bad without cracking it is place an uncracked egg in a bowl, and if it floats, then it has gone bad. Alright, so next we have vegetables. As you guys may have noticed, vegetables rarely have printed dates. So the best way to determine if a vegetable has gone bad is to use your own senses and your own judgment. So if a vegetable starts to ooze a weird liquid, then it should probably be thrown away. If it's growing mold or if it has an off smell or taste to it, it obviously should be thrown away. So here we have an example of kale. On the left, we have some very brown, wilty looking kale. You can see that there's some mold. If maybe we have the kale with us, we might notice some weird oozing liquid. So obviously that kale should be thrown away, while the kale on the right is green, it's fresh, it's sturdy, so that kale is definitely good to eat. Alright, so next we have fruits. Fruits are pretty similar to veggies. They usually don't have printed dates, and it's kind of the same criteria for knowing whether or not to throw it away. If it begins to ooze or gets mold, then it should be thrown away. But wrinkly or bruised fruit is still absolutely good to eat. Here we have a good example of that. On the left, we have an obviously moldy and not good to eat banana, but on the right, we have a banana that has some brown spots and has definitely got some bruising, but it is still completely good to eat. Another example of this is peaches. They get bruised a lot, but they're still definitely good to eat even after they have gotten some bruises. And if bruising bothers you, then you can always just cut it off and still eat the parts of the fruit that are not bruised, but bruised fruit is definitely still good to eat. Alright, so next we have meat, poultry, and fish. And these things you do need to be a little bit more careful with because they are more likely to carry pathogenic bacteria that could get you sick. So I've separated meat, poultry, and fish into 3 further subcategories: cooked, uncooked, and frozen. So let's start with cooked meat. Cooked meat can last 5 days after being cooked. Uncooked, 3 to 5 days after purchase for cuts of meat, 1 to 2 days for ground meat. Frozen, 4 to 6 months after purchase. Poultry, cooked, 5 days after being cooked. Uncooked, 1 to 2 days after being purchased. Frozen, 3 to 4 months after being purchased. Cooked fish, 3 to 4 days after being cooked. Uncooked, 1 to 2 days after printed date. Frozen, 6 to 9 months after printed date. So as you can see, frozen is definitely the best way to keep your meat. It'll maintain its longevity for a much longer time than cooked or uncooked. Alright, last we have wheat products. So bread can be kept 5 to 7 days after the printed date. Flour 6 to 8 months past printed date, and crackers 3 months past printed date. And if you're a little bit confused as to why I'm saying printed date and not sell by date or best by date, it's because usually most products only have one of those dates, so whichever is on there, that is what you're going to use to make your decision. Alright, so when you're determining whether or not you should throw a food item away, definitely always take into account the information that you've just learned. However, the aforementioned longevities are obviously approximates and would not be applicable to every single food item you ever buy. So the best way to determine when to throw a food item away is to use your senses and your judgment. And I like to call this the golden rule of food waste because I think this is the most efficient way to determine whether or not food should be thrown away. So if you're using your sense of sight, if a food item looks off, you should probably throw it away, with some exceptions. For example, the fruit, bruised fruit is definitely still good to eat, like we said before. If you're using your sense of smell, if a food item smells funky or bad or not like it should, you should throw it away. And taste, if a food item tastes weird or rancid or generally bad, definitely toss it, but do be careful with the taste because you don't want to eat something that has gone bad. So definitely use taste in combination with your other senses to determine whether or not you should throw something away. So let's practice a little bit with our sense of sight. Alright, so here we have a bottle of milk. Take a second and decide if you want to keep this or toss this. If you said toss, you're correct. As you can see, this milk is separated, the solids are at the bottom, the liquid is at the top, and there's definitely some curdling, so you definitely want to throw this away. So next we have this strawberry. Take a second and decide if you want to keep or toss. If you said keep, you are correct. As you can see, this strawberry just has some slight bruising, and as we said before, bruised fruit is still definitely good to eat. If the bruising bothers you, just cut it off, but it's good to eat still. Next we have this cucumber. Take a second and decide. If you said toss, you're correct. This cucumber is almost half covered in mold, and you definitely don't want to be eating vegetable mold, so this is definitely something you want to throw away. Alright, next we have this ground meat. Take a second and decide. If you said keep, you're correct. This meat does have some slight discoloration, but unless your meat is completely covered in discoloration, it is still completely fine to eat. And last we have this bread. Take a second and decide if you want to keep or toss. If you said toss, you're correct. This bread has some pretty apparent mold, and you don't want to eat bread mold, so this is definitely something that you want to throw in the trash. Alright, so we've made it to the second half of the webinar, which is what to do with your food waste that you do make, and that is composting. So we're going to start off with what is compost. Compost is organic matter that has been decomposed in a process called composting, and that might not tell you anything. So composting is the process by which organic materials, otherwise regarded as waste products, is recycled to produce a soil conditioner that provides soil with helpful nutrients. Now let's get into how is compost made. This is actually quite a complicated process, so we're going to watch this YouTube video to make it a little bit simpler. I know this video is a little bit silly, but I think it's really good at giving the basic idea of how compost is made.
Look out! Here comes another load! Oh, hello. I'm George the foreman. Welcome to our compost bin. This is very lucky indeed, because you've arrived just in time for another delivery. And now I can show you just how compost is made with the help of some of my family and friends. Right then, let's start by taking a look at some of the everyday stuff that we can turn into compost. Everyday stuff that you're kind enough to bring to our bin. Great! There's a good mix of greens and browns in here. Like any recipe, good compost needs a mix of the right ingredients. The apple cores, vegetable peelings and tea bags, for instance, are called greens. They're quick to rot down and add moisture to the bin. Things like egg boxes, cardboard and fallen leaves are called browns, and these provide fibre and make useful air pockets in the mixture. As you can see, before this lot even had time to settle, Ferdy the fruit fly and all his mates are all over the place helping to start the process by breaking down the greens. Oh. Morning, Brian. See, over there, they're brandling worms, eating their way through the rotting debris. Unlike normal earthworms, which like soil, Brian and his friends prefer this lovely, rich environment and can eat up to half their own body weight in a day. Their tunnelling also provides little airways for oxygen to get through so that we can all breathe down here. Oh, look, there's Pippa Ann and her colony tucking in as well. Tuck in, young Pip. Hopefully there's plenty more where that came from. Phew, things are certainly starting to warm up around here. Now, at this level, in the first few days, tiny microbes such as Beryl and Bertie bacteria here, who are so small that you can fit 1 billion of them on a teaspoon, also help break down the waste, making it easier for my friends to eat and slowly turn it into compost. Let's go down to the next level and see how our compost is developing. Hello, young Woody. Good lad. Keep up the good work. It's a pleasure, George. It's hedge clippings today, my favourite. It's even warmer down here. At over 40 degrees centigrade, it's the warmest place in the compost bin, thanks to some more microbes like Beryl and Bertie called actinomycetes, which help break down the tough and woody bits. Watch out, George. At this speed, we can't slow down. That's Steve Snail and his best friend Sally Slug rushing off to make a start on the new delivery of plant material that's just come down from the top floor. They might not be fast, but they do a very thorough job of helping to get rid of the tough woody stuff that hasn't broken down yet.
Alright, so now that you've watched the video, here is a little summary of what was said in the video. Basically, the way that compost is made is a mixture of browns and greens are combined into a large pile. Greens are quick rotting, nitrogen rich, and add moisture, while browns provide fiber, are carbon rich, and create air pockets in the mixture. Then organisms like flies, worms, and ants consume the mixture after microbes have already broken it down. And then actinomycetes help break down tougher woody pieces of material that the other organisms couldn't. And all of these organisms work together to consume and break down organic material and excrete valuable nutrients that make compost so useful. So in the bottom right corner, we have a picture of some microbes on a cucumber, and I think it's kind of interesting to see in real life what the process of decomposing looks like. Alright, so the video and the summary both mentioned greens and browns, so let's talk a little bit more about what those actually are. Greens, remember, are nitrogen rich, they provide moisture, and they are quick to rot. So these are things like green leaves, garden waste, flowers, vegetables, fruit peels, scraps of food, coffee grounds, tea leaves, tea bags, and eggshells. When I think compost, I think of things like peeling a potato or cutting off the top of a carrot or peeling an orange. Those are the kind of things that would go in your green section of compost. And browns, remember, are carbon rich. They provide fiber and they create air pockets because they tend to be larger than greens. So these are things like tree needles, dried leaves, paper egg cartons, paper products like towels, napkins, cardboard that has been cut into small pieces, shredded brown paper bags, dried grass, dead houseplants, shredded newspaper, bark, coffee filters, straw, sawdust in small amounts, and lint. Alright, now let's talk about what can't be composted. So I've separated these into food-ish items and materials. So for the food-ish items, invasive weeds, meat, fish, bones, fat, oil, and grease, dairy products, and cooked foods all cannot be composted. And for materials, plastics, metals, glass, toxic material, charcoal, chemicals, and pet waste all also cannot be composted. Alright, so let's get into how you can actually make compost right in your backyard. The first step you want to do is choose where you're going to make your compost. You can either make it in an open pile in your backyard or in some sort of bin, like an old trash bin or a garbage can or even an old storage bin. Basically anything that's large enough to hold a substantial amount of waste. Then you want to choose a location that is outside and easy to get to. You definitely don't want to make compost inside because it gets rather smelly, and you want to make sure that you can easily access your compost bin because you will need to be maintaining it rather frequently. Then you want to start building your compost pile. You always begin with a layer of coarse brown material like twigs, cover with brown dried leaves, and then alternate between greens and browns. And then, as your greens and browns accumulate in your kitchen or your garden or wherever, continue to add them until your compost bin is full. And this might actually take longer than expected because contents will shrink as they begin to decompose in your bin. And make sure to always top off your compost bin with a layer of browns, like dried leaves, when you add new layers. Alright, so the next step is to keep your compost bin maintained. You actually want to make sure that the contents of your bin are mixed. So you want to mix them about once a week and whenever you add fresh material. So if you add a layer of greens, you want to mix it in with the lower layers to make sure all of the contents are being decomposed at relatively equal rates. And you also want to maintain a wrung out sponge level of moisture in your compost bin. So if it is too wet, add dry materials like dried leaves or sawdust or shredded newspaper, and if it's too dry, just add some water. And then the last step is to harvest your compost. Finished usable compost will be dark, crumbly, and earthy smelling, and it should look like the picture in the top right here. And this will usually appear within 4 to 6 months of starting your compost, but because not all of it is decomposed at the exact same time, some of it will be finished and some of it will be unfinished, so you only want to remove the finished materials and leave the unfinished materials in your compost pile or bin. Alright, so now that you've finished your compost, let's get into how you can actually use it. So compost can essentially be used as a fertilizer. So let's explore ways that you can actually use that fertilizer. One of the most common uses is to use it in your lawn or garden. So for your lawn, you just sprinkle your compost on your lawn a couple times a year. In your garden, you can use it as a top dressing, which is basically just a blanket layer of compost over the soil for flower beds or even at the base of tree stumps to help them grow. Or you can mix compost just right in with your soil to plant things. Or this one's a little bit weird, but you can make compost tea, which is basically just like a enriched water for your plants. And to do this, you just fill a cheesecloth with compost and let it steep overnight in water, and then you can water your plants and they'll be nice and healthy and they'll have all the right nutrients to thrive. Alright, we have reached the end of this webinar. If you haven't already, please fill out the seminar worksheet Google form. It should be attached somewhere near where you found this video. I hope you guys learned something useful. I hope you feel inspired to really be conscious and aware of how much food you eat and how much food ends up in the trash, and hopefully make a change for the better. I hope you feel inspired to go make a compost bin in your backyard, and if so, that is great. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening, and I hope you enjoyed this webinar.